Hey, I should know better than to be trying to make this video right now because Mercury is retrograding all over me today. But I'm gonna give it a go. It's been a day, let me tell you that. Um, I have, I lurk in a few Facebook tarot groups, uh, and I'm sort of active really in only one, just because it's the one that sort of seems to sort of pop up most. But I noticed a trend of folks asking questions, especially folks who are learning, and I think it's a great forum for it. So the trend isn't the question asking. That's not the bad thing, or there's no bad thing. I should say that. I noticed something that I think I can offer, especially to someone who's learning, that could probably save a lot of frustration in reading for yourself or for someone else. And where this comes from, what prompted this, is I noticed a handful of questions over the time that I've been in these various groups, and someone will say, "Hey, I did this reading. How can I figure out when something's going to happen? Does this suit represent spring or fall in this reading?" And I think those are good questions because we all know that when is a hard question in tarot, right? It's not easy, or in any, I think, any form of divination, of cartomancy. When is a tough question, and I also think yes and no questions are really tough. Although for different reasons, I think yes and no questions are tough because eh, there are so many variables at work at any given time that it could be yes now and it could be no tomorrow. And actually, I tell a story about that in my book. I don't want to make this video too long because when I seem to record videos using photo booth, it crashes if they're over a certain amount of time. So I'm going to try to keep this brief. But so the questions are sort of, here's this reading I did. How do I know when? How do I know if this means yes or no? How do I know whether this means that she loves me or not? So here's the one simple tool that I think all new readers should know is it doesn't matter what correspondences you use. Now, I don't mean that it doesn't matter literally. I mean whatever systems you're learning and choosing from, whether it's the kind of cards, the Rider Waite Smith or whatever, Toth or Hipdex, or you're using my book or someone else's, that whatever system you're using is fine. Whatever correspondences you assign to the cards is fine. It doesn't matter which one you choose. What matters is that you choose one, ish, right? That's the important thing, because they're all right to whoever is using them. That's and that variety is great. And so when you find something that resonates with you, that's the one I think that you stick to. But once you've done that, what even beyond that, the most important thing is that before you shuffle the cards, you set the boundaries, you set the rules. So here's my tip: know the rules for the reading before you shuffle the cards and draw them. All right, so here's an example of that. Look first at the question you're asking, and if the question is not worded specifically enough, make sure you're asking the question you need to ask. Because I'm a firm believer that whatever cards we draw answer the question that we asked and nothing else. So if the question is, will I get the job? Look at what you're asking. You're asking, it's a yes or no question. It's a closed question. And so what you're looking for is a yes or no answer. Will I get the job? Yes or no? If you're asking, when will I get the job? Obviously, that's a very different question. And it's interesting because it implies something. It implies that you're going to get the job. You will get this job. So you're assuming that it's a yes, and it's just a matter of at what point it happens. Now that's it. It's a curious thing, right? Do you already know you will? Will you? Or maybe you will, you know what I mean? But just sort of, when will I get the job implies something. When will he propose implies something. How will he propose implies something. Because again, we're assuming that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how. So look at the question and decide what you're really asking, and if it's the answer you're really looking for, and decide whether it's implying anything. And if it is implying anything, think about whether or not it's reasonable. Um, and it's not to say don't ask when will he propose, you know what I mean? Because it may be something he said he would do. But just think about the question in that way. Sort of examine it and say, is this the question I mean to be asking? That's part one. Part two is then to decide how, before you shuffle the cards, you know or you will know what the answer means. So think about how specific you can get. Think about what you're really looking for. If it's a when question, theoretically, the meaning of the card only matters as much as the when goes. If you're, I don't have a. This is so stupid. I don't have a deck in front of me right now. If you're asking when will he propose, and you draw the Three of Swords, you know, the answer isn't well. Here's where we go down the rabbit hole, right? You could read that answer as like he won't. You're gonna be alone forever, you know, or whatever. The Three of Swords, right? You know, but you could look at it that way. But the other thing that you could do to get an answer that's sort of more close to what you're aligned with is to, before you do this reading, decide that 1 through 10. Well, here's a couple ways you could do it, right? You could decide that the first 12 cards of the majors represent the months. And you shuffle all the majors, and if you get one of those cards, then that's, you know, if you get the Magician, then that means it'll be in January. And if you get a card that's not one of those 12, then it's, you know, like a Magic 8 Ball, it's too soon to tell, for example. You could do something like that. You could do the thing of assigning each of the suits a month, or I'm sorry, a season. Or you could use the minors as the 52 weeks of the year. What doesn't matter, though. You know, what matters is that before you shuffle the cards, you say, I'm only going to use the majors in this reading, and if it's 1 through 12, that tells me the month it's going to happen. And then if it's anything else, then it's too soon. You know what I mean? That the method matters less than that you've committed to the method before you sit down to do the reading. Same thing with yes or no questions. There are a lot of ways to do it. You know, you could again go with the thing of if it's a coin or a cup, it means yes. If it's a sword or a wand, it means no. If it's a major, then it means whatever you want it to be. I don't know, you know, whatever. But the point is that you know how you're going to read before you sit down and do it. You set the rules and you make that decision. And if it's the Ace of Cups that comes up, the meaning can be secondary, you know, the sort of newness and freshness and feeling, all of that can be secondary. But the answer is yes, because you chose the Ace of Cups. And what matters is that cups represent yes and coins represent yes. You know what I mean? That's the thing that matters. Now, all of this depends, you know, these are very predictive kinds of situations we're talking about. All of this depends a lot on, you know, frankly, on how good you are at predicting things, which is a whole other matter, and how much prediction is possible, which is a whole other matter. But you're more likely to get an accurate answer if you do set the rules before you read. And I would recommend, you know, doing that well before you read. You know, I would, you know, if this is something that you are just sort of experimenting with and learning, I would make a chart for yourself and say, yeses and nos are this. Here's how I know yes or no in a reading. Here's how I know when in a reading. Again, the systems don't matter as much as that you have one. Kelly is from Truth and Story says this a lot in live chat. The system matters less than that you have a system and that you more or less stick to it, and I believe that. And to take it even further, know the rules, set the rules. The cards are obeying your rules when you shuffle them. You tell them that a coin means yes, then that's how they're going to behave. But if you don't give them boundaries, if you don't give them rules, then they're not going to behave. You know, they're going to do whatever they want, assuming that you know what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm anthropomorphizing them a little bit, but you get my drift, hopefully, which is that they will play nicely with boundaries. When you don't give them boundaries, they play less nicely. So that's my recommendation. It's a very, very, very simple thing, but I think where a lot of people get lost, especially in their early days of reading, is that they get frustrated because they ask a question and they can't figure out how to answer it because they didn't set the boundaries. This is where a lot of people struggle with the court cards in particular. They didn't tell the court cards how to behave before they read. They just let the court cards do whatever they want. So, you know, if you're trying to figure out who, is a great question to who, know that make a decision about how the courts will represent people, or whether the majors represent people and how. You know, if it's a major card, do you decide personality attributes for each of the majors? Do you do that for each of the courts? What if you shuffle the whole deck and you don't get a major or a court? How do you know who in that case? I think that, you know, it's super important. You know, again, I think there's only so specific we can be with any form of something because, again, we're working with a limited language like any other language. But I do think that if you set the boundaries, if you set the rules ahead of time, you are more likely to get an answer that makes sense and actually answers the question that you asked. All right. So just to summarize, like, dissect your question and make sure you're asking the thing that you really want to be asking, and then figure out how, you know, what is your question really asking, and then set the rules, if you haven't already, for how the cards will answer that question. So if the question is, will I get the job? You have a yes or no. It's a closed-ended question. Then you need to decide how the cards are going to talk to you. Same thing if it's a when question. You have to decide what means when, and how you do that. Tell the cards how to talk to you, and they will respond more appropriately. Same thing with who, same thing with how, all right? So that is my recommendation. I think that if you do take these few minutes before you read or before you know, whatever, if you set up a system for yourself, it's going to save you some frustration that a lot of folks, I feel, and certainly I felt, deal with, especially when they're learning. So I hope this helps. Be good. Have a great week.